There it is. Perfect. Yes. Limitless opportunities to be humbled. Okay, well, here we go. It's Easter weekend. Do you guys want to sit for 30 minutes tonight, maybe? Or is that too long? 20?
I'm really struggling at 20.
Let's do 20. Yeah, 20 is good.
So are you guys?
No, 20 is good. It's good. Okay, so yeah, Sutra chant, yes?
Yes.
Okay, let's do that. You ready? Yes? You can read it off the screen if you like. Yeah? Does that work? Okay, cool. Okay. The Dharma incomparably profound and infinitely subtle is rarely met even in 100,000 million kalpas. Now we see it, hear it, receive and maintain it. May we completely realize the Tathagata's true meaning. Okay, this is our 7th night. Yeah. And we're moving along to chapters 13 and 14 in the Diamond Sutra tonight. And yeah, so I'm gonna just blast through this. So again, the sutra, it basically is stating that it's trying to bring us to this realization of emptiness, that all forms are emptiness, that emptiness makes up all forms. And this leads to freedom from attachment to phenomenon. So that's what it's really about tonight. The 2 chapters that we'll be looking at go even more into depth, helping us kind of maybe attune to that deeper level of, that other level of reality, the source of all things, and emptiness. Yeah. So again, it's always the question, what are we really? And to help us disidentify from the concept of an individuated self that reacts to the phenomenal world in specific and predictable ways, and to attempt to come to this place where that's less of a thing. Yeah, so what are we really? And we're trying to determine our true identity. And specifically, emerging from emptiness, how we're doing that all the time. And so then not to attach to self or other living beings, and just to recognize that we all are the same and all coming from the same source. Yeah. So another way to look at that is that there's these 2 sides to reality. There's the side called Ji and the side called Ri, and these are concepts that are used sometimes to describe how this is. So Ji is everyday life. It's the phenomenal world. It's the world we can see and have contact with, the world that we usually operate in, and the world that we usually identify with, that we're taught to identify with, really. It's kind of consensus reality. And Ri, on the other hand, is absolute reality, the emptiness that's in everything. And definitely the Diamond Sutra is about cutting through the illusion of Ji, right? The illusion of the visible self and the visible world. So that we can let go of sensory phenomena a little bit, and the thoughts associated with sensory phenomena particularly. Because experiencing sensory phenomenon and thinking about that doesn't give us a solid foundation to live from, because the phenomenal world is impermanent and changing and not real.
And if we get attached to something, then we want it and desire it, which
leads to suffering. Exactly, yeah, that's right. And so the idea behind the Diamond Sutra is to be in touch with absolute reality, the emptiness that is everything. So in these two chapters, what he's teaching us, what the Buddha's talking about, is that if we let our minds rest on Ri or in Ri, and not allowing our minds to be absorbed in thoughts based in Ji, we could be free of suffering and experience supreme enlightenment. That's his message for tonight. Yeah. And so the idea is to set your mind, I mean, the purpose of practice is to set yourself down on yourself, really, on your true self as you're emanating from Ri. That's the idea. But on the other hand, Ji and Ri are actually very closely related to each other. Like the emptiness is what makes up the visible reality. So they're really the same thing. There isn't any separation between them. I think the point is that we kind of tend not to know about absolute reality, and so that's why it's important to bring it forward so that it can be experienced and understood and lived from. Yeah. So there's no separation between relative reality and absolute reality. They're the same. And so then this is it, right? This very moment right now is where emptiness is becoming form, like in our presence in this moment, and in no other moment, and at no other time, and in no other place except right now, right here. So this is it. This is the manifestation of emptiness right in this moment. Yeah. And then, of course, what that means is that you are it already. You have it already. This is it already. It's just a question of, it's almost like developing a different sense where you can kind of sense into this other reality and be aware of it. But I think someone has to point it out first for you to even have it as an option, you know. Otherwise, it's very easy to go through life and not know that there's another option, or that there is another reality. Yeah, yeah. So I thought instead of reading through it 3 times, it's kind of lengthy. I thought I would just go through frame by frame. Does that seem good? And maybe, yeah, read it off the, does that sound okay? Yeah? Yeah. And so the question is, so at this point, Subhuti asked Buddha, by what name should we know this sutra? And Buddha says, this sutra shall be known as the diamond that cuts through illusion. By this name it shall be revered and studied and observed. What does this name mean? It means that when the Buddha named it, he did not have in mind any definite or arbitrary conception, and so named it. This sutra is hard and sharp, like a diamond that will cut away all arbitrary conceptions and bring one to the other shore of enlightenment. So that, in his view, enlightenment is freedom from suffering due to not being attached to the phenomenal world, right? Not being attached to sensation or the thoughts that arise from it, or the ego that's based in it. Yeah, that was his teaching. What do you think, Subhuti? Has the Buddha taught any definite teaching in this sutra? And Subhuti says, no, you haven't taught any definite teaching in this sutra, which is, I think, Buddha's his thing here, and in Buddhist teaching in general, it's teaching without teaching. Because really, ultimately, the experience can't be taught. You know, the experience is, we can talk about it and point to it and make it known cognitively. But what ultimately is necessary is that we find a place to have it be our reality. And that can only probably happen through, mind transmission is how they talk about that in Buddhism, right? That you kind of will have to spend time with somebody who understands that reality, and there, it's almost like you end up copying them, sort of. You learn from them in that way, just by copying. Yeah, so mind transmission is a big concept, especially in in Zen, that's pretty much how they teach. There's this story about the Buddha. He was teaching everybody, and he picked up a lotus flower and kind of turned it and smiled. And one of his older students, Makashyapa, I think his name was, but I could be saying that wrong. He looked at the Buddha, and the Buddha looked at him, and Buddha said, in this moment, this person has received my teaching. And that person became the successor, yeah, exactly, received the transmission. And so that's the moment that Zen Buddhism is really based on, is this idea of mind-to-mind transmission. So really there's nothing to teach. It's kind of just, I mean, you talk about it, it's like this, you try and, you know, make sense of it, but really the words are pretty empty. You kind of have to fall into it.
The way I see it is the words are kind of one sense removed from the
Yeah,
experience.
yeah, they are.
So if we're caught over here, we're not
Getting there, yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's right.
because then we're relating to the word
Mm-hmm.
and not experiencing the experience.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, that's the trick. Mm-hmm. So, and then the next topic is this, what do you think, Subhuti? Are there many particles of dust in the vast universe? And Subhuti replied, yes, many. And then Subhuti said, or Buddha says, Subhuti, when the Buddha speaks of particles of dust, it does not mean I'm thinking of any definite or arbitrary thought. I'm merely using these words as a figure of speech. They are not real, only illusion. It is just the same with the word universe. These words do not assert any definite or arbitrary idea. I'm only using the words as words. Right? Because his point is that it all is really this shunyata, this emptiness, right? The universe is nothing more than a big, big empty. Subhuti, what do you think? Can the Buddha be perceived by means of his 32 physical characteristics? So yeah, Buddha, you know, back in the day, they felt they could recognize an enlightened one based on actually physiognomy, like how their face was shaped, how their eyebrows were shaped, how their eyes were, how their ears were. And there were 32 different physical characteristics that they would look for that would indicate whether someone was a Buddha or not. And Subhuti says, no, most honored one, the Buddha cannot be perceived by his 32 physical characteristics. Why? Because the Buddha teaches that they are not real, but are merely called the 32 physical characteristics. Yeah. Because, you know, Buddha, the thing about Buddha is, like, he is, like Prajna Paramita, he is enlightened mind, right? Completely and totally. So you can't really say that you can recognize him by physical characteristics, because all he is this wisdom, yeah. So, and then the Buddha, he makes this point, Subhuti, if a good and faithful person, whether male or female, has, for the sake of compassion and charity, been sacrificing their life for generation upon generation, for as many generations as the grains of sand in 3,000 universes, and another follower has been studying and observing even a single section of this sutra and explains it to others, that person's blessings and merit would be far greater. So clearly this is a teaching that this teacher, the Shakyamuni Buddha, felt was really pretty fundamental and significant and important, yeah. This concept of emptiness. What do you think, Julie? Interesting.
It's pre-formed.
Hmm?
It's pre-formed. It's foreign concept.
Foreign concept, yeah, it really is a foreign concept, that's for sure. Yeah. At that time, after listening to the sutra, Subhuti had understood its profound meaning and was moved to tears. He said, what a rare and precious thing it is that you should deliver such a deeply profound teaching. Since the day I attained the eyes of understanding, thanks to the guidance of the Buddha, I have never before heard teachings so deep and wonderful as these. Most honored one, if someone hears this sutra and has pure and clear confidence in it, they will have a profound insight into the truth. Having perceived that profound insight, that person will realize the rarest kind of virtue. Most honored one, that insight into the truth is essentially not insight into the truth, but is what the Buddha calls insight into the truth. So even
I love when they do that. It just
I know, right? So even insight into the truth is a thing that,
yeah,
it's not, yeah, on this kind of, in this way of knowing or understanding. And then Subhuti goes on, he says, most honored one, having listened to this sutra, I'm able to receive it and retain it with faith and understanding. This is not difficult for me, but in ages to come, in the last 500 years, if there's a person who hears this sutra, who receives and retains it with faith and understanding, then that person will be a rare one, a person of most remarkable achievement. Such a person will be able to awaken pure faith because they have ceased to cherish any arbitrary notions of their own selfhood, other selves, living beings, or a universal self. Why? Because if they continue to hold on to arbitrary conceptions as to their own selfhood, they will be holding on to something that is non-existent. It is the same with all arbitrary conceptions of other selves, living beings, or a universal self. These are all expressions of non-existent things. Buddhas are Buddhas because they have been able to discard all the arbitrary conceptions of form and phenomena. They have transcended all perceptions and have penetrated the illusion of all forms. Yeah. And yet this is not a thing that, the other crazy thing about Buddhism is there's nothing to attain, right? So the idea of no gain, no effort, nothing to attain, it already is right here, right now. So then the point is not to strive after anything or to take it as an assignment or like put it on your to-do list. That doesn't work at all. It's, yeah.
So are you going to give us a transmission tonight so we understand this?
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
Yeah, there was a moment where, like Roshi down in California, right? He was delivering a Dharma talk and breaking exactly the subject down, like as plainly as possible. Here's emptiness, here's form. This is how it is. This is the simplest way I can say it to you. And I'm sitting over there going, yep, that's pretty clear. Yep, that's pretty clear. And he was speaking from a text from Dogen, who was a Japanese writer in the 13th century. Great teacher, like voluminous author in Zen, Soto, started Soto Zen Buddhism. And he said, oh, and at this point, Dogen paused for mind transmission. So then he pauses in his talk. And I've had that experience with Roshi before, where he pauses in a talk and you just get a hit, like all of a sudden, there's a realization that happens or something unfolds, yeah. So then I was like, ready. I was like, oh, okay, that's what's going on? So the next time he paused, man, I just sucked it in. And he actually kind of looked at me like this. It's like, yeah, man, if you're offering, I'm accepting. Let's go. So I know you're feeling. I know you're feeling. Please just, give me that mind transmission. I get it totally. Yes, of course. Well, I'm doing what I can. But really, I don't know. Maybe you have to meet Roshi or come down and, hang out in California with all these crazy enlightened dudes down there. Yes. Yeah? Anyways, penetrated the illusion of all forms, just recognizing that it really is all the same. It's all the same. And the Buddha replied, so it is, Subhuti. Most wonderfully blessed will be those beings that on hearing this sutra will not tremble, nor be frightened, or terrified in any way. And why? The Buddha has taught this sutra as the highest perfection. And what the Buddha teaches as the highest perfection, that also the innumerable blessed Buddhas do teach. Therefore, is it called the highest perfection. So it is a little scary, this whole emptiness concept, right? Yeah, for sure. Like watching your own mind and body kind of end is... yeah. I brought someone with me down in California this last time, and I said to her, well, I don't want to, you don't have to tell me the whole thing, but in 4 words or less, tell me what you thought. And she said, well, it's not a vacation. It's definitely not a vacation. It's like, but on the other hand, like, what else is there? I don't know, what else is there that's really going to sustain and be worthwhile and, yeah. Yeah, and so not tremble or be frightened or terrified in any way. I think what keeps us from being enlightened, what keeps us from having this insight really probably mostly is fear. I think what keeps most people from ever even like attempting any sort of spiritual pathway is, it's really scary, right? It's the death of the self, pretty much, eventually, right? certainly the dialing down, right? And yeah, it doesn't sound like a picnic, you know? But you know, that ego is not doing us any favors, definitely not. It doesn't have anything good to say. That was another thing Roshi said in California during his talk. He said, you know, if you're listening to the ego, just say to it, why don't you have anything nice to say to me? And it'll just shut up because you've seen through it, right? You've seen through it. It doesn't have anything nice to say. No, it doesn't. Yep. So, Subhuti, when I talk about the practice of transcendent patience, I do not hold on to any arbitrary conceptions about the phenomena of patience. I merely refer to it as the practice of transcendent patience. And why is that? Because when, thousands of lifetimes ago, the Prince of Kalinga severed the flesh from my limbs and my body, and I had no perception of a self, a being, a soul, or a universal self. If I had cherished any of these arbitrary notions at the time my limbs were being torn away, I would have fallen into anger and hatred. So he's talking about how a past life experience sort of informed his understanding of the universe, right? And the ability to not be attached and to find patience even in that level of suffering. Which, again, it's not a vacation. It's really not a vacation. Oh my gosh. Spiritual pathway.
Torn limb.
Right? Limb from limb. And finding the space to go, I'm not really a self. This is not really, yeah. Yeah, interesting. I also remember, Subhuti, that during my 500 previous lives, I had used life after life to practice patience and to look upon my life humbly as though I were a saint called upon to suffer humility. Even then, my mind was free of arbitrary conceptions of the phenomena of myself, a being, a soul, or a universal self. So I guess just to point out that, you know, a certain amount of effort and toil going into this way of looking at things. Therefore, and this is really kind of, I would say, almost a central declaration in the sutra. It's maybe one of the most important pieces, because it kind of sums it all up. Therefore, Subhuti, disciples should leave behind all distinctions of phenomena and awaken the thought of the attainment of supreme enlightenment. A disciple should do this by not allowing their mind to depend upon ideas evoked by the world of the senses, by not allowing their mind to depend upon ideas stirred by sounds, odors, flavors, sensory touch, or any other qualities. The disciple's mind should be kept independent of any thoughts that might arise within it. If the disciple's mind depends upon anything in the sensory realm, it will have no solid foundation in any reality. This is why Buddha teaches that the mind of a disciple should not accept the appearance of things as a basis when exercising charity. Subhuti, as disciples practice compassion and charity for the welfare of all living beings, they should do it without relying on appearances and without attachment. Just as the Buddha declares that form is not form, so he also declares that all living beings are, in fact, not living beings. So he's talking about what to base the foundation of your life on, you know, and certainly this thing about thoughts and basing a life on thoughts and opinions about visible reality or, you know, the sensory world is not a pathway to happiness in the opinion of this particular enlightened teacher. Ultimately, it's impermanent, and even though we have craving for it and we have aversion towards it and we think it will make us happy and we strive after it and we work really hard to get it, the truth is it's not real and ultimately not satisfying. And so his point is to, rather than base our life on what we think, base our life on emptiness, on the truth of nothing.
With that thought, can you take a moment and transmit that to us? Smoothly.
Sure. Pause. Yeah, the disciple's mind should be kept independent of any thoughts that might arise within it. What I notice in my sitting practice lately is that thoughts tend to bring distortion, hey? Thinking muddies the water, like it changes the shape of the mind, actually. Yeah. So the non-thinking mind is pretty spacious and clear and open. And the thinking mind is a little bit torqued, twisted, grasping, yeah? And you can kind of feel that in your being a little bit, hey? You know, the holding on to distortions. Like we know when we're lying to ourselves, right? We know when we're grasping, we know when it creates that's what creates shapes in the body, distortions, in my opinion, is the thought forms, hey? And so then, you know, it's much clearer not to attach to thought forms. It opens up the spaciousness of the mind, right? Prepares the mind, I would say. So if we're thinking, and that's all right here, and that's what we're doing, then we're really kind of missing out on the bigger reality, right? We kind of have to just sort of, at least temporarily, put the thoughts down. Just not engage. Not engage. Yeah, the disciple's mind should be kept independent of any thoughts that might arise within it. If the disciple's mind depends upon anything in the sensory realm, it will have no solid foundation in any reality. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Want to do another chant? Ready to do this one? Close it out? Okay. May the merit of this penetrate into each thing in all places, so that we, with all sentient beings, together realize the Buddha way. Okay. Meditation time. Do you want to take a little break, move around, get some water? Yeah.
Question
Yeah.
about the sutra.
Yeah.
So,
That could be working. One never quite knows. Or I never know. Does it look like it's working? It looks like it's working?
Yeah, looks like it's lit up in the back.
Okay. Okay, so I think this might be our 8th class, maybe, of the Diamond Sutra. And we're on chapter 17 and 18. So moving right along. And yeah, let's just offer this little chant and then we'll get started. Okay. Okay. The Dharma incomparably profound and infinitely subtle is rarely met even in 100,000 million kalpas. Now we see it, hear it, receive and maintain it. May we completely realize the Tathagata's true meaning. Yeah. into the Diamond Sutra. And I know you guys have been listening to it a little bit, hey? Yeah, it's good. It's really helpful to hear it kind of a lot, I think.
It's a great way to go to sleep.
And it's a great way to go to sleep. I almost feel like we do sort of keep processing the last thing in, right? It sort of floats around in there, I feel like, in our sleeping hours too, you know. You're going to be asleep for a while, you might as well use that time.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's quite as good as using your waking hours, but it probably won't hurt you. Yeah. Anyway, so we're still talking about this idea of emptiness, about, it's not really an idea, it's more like a felt sense almost, or an experience of, like, you know, of the thing behind the thing. And in Zen Buddhism, they talk about that, they call it eko hensho, the art of taking the step backwards. I feel like it's almost like we move through life and, you know, we're very aware of our front side, right, in the world. But, you know, if we kind of take a step back into what's behind or what's under, then we can start to see that really what's under is more what's real than what we see. There's a famous poem in Zen tradition called the Sandokai that talks about how the reality that we see, it really just fits this emptiness like a box in its lid. You know, the emptiness is really just under, just behind. And so the practice of meditation, of Zazen anyway, is like, you know, taking that step backwards into our more authentic self, which happens just naturally by adopting the posture. It's kind of inevitable. We sit ourselves down on ourselves and take that step backwards into a more true version of reality, I would say. Yeah. So understanding that emptiness, or acknowledging that emptiness, living from that emptiness, can then inform our life and help us be less attached to particular results and come more from a place of, like, non-attachment, and therefore more compassion and more understanding that there is no separate self anywhere. So then therefore we are all it together. We're not just in it together, we are actually it together. Yeah. So, and tonight we're going to look a little bit at the idea that thought is also emptiness. You know, thought arises from the same place that everything else does. So thought is no more or less real than anything else that you could see or point to or experience. So thought itself is emptiness. And so it's fun, it's interesting, you can ask yourself, where do thoughts come from, you know, and you can almost like grab onto them like a rope and follow them right down, and eventually they do lead into the emptiness, you know. Once the thoughts kind of end, then what's left is where they come from, which is this kind of big empty space. And the thoughts themselves really don't have a life of their own unless we sort of feed them. And there's a Japanese teacher that has a book called Opening the Hand of Thought, which I haven't read, but I really like that statement, opening the hand of thought. It like releases us almost, unclenches, right? And you can feel your mind settling into this no thought kind of state, right? Yeah, so where do thoughts come from is a good thing to consider, and then where do they go, right? They just kind of arise and disappear like everything else does. So yeah, thoughts like that. So, and everything is like thought, so it all goes like that. It all sort of comes from somewhere and then it goes somewhere. And so I think what we're getting at here with the emptiness is, well, where does it all come from? Where does it all go to? Yeah, that's the kind of thing that we're doing. So based on emptiness arising from and returning to the same place is where we're at. So then, yeah, we've got this chapter 17 to go through, and I'm thinking that maybe I'll just read it. It's quite lengthy, 17, 18 are a bit on the long side. So maybe I'll just read them like from the PowerPoint. Yeah?
Sure.
And we can kind of chat about them as we go. I think that's the best thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so, so remember, this is the same question that Subhuti posed at the beginning of this sutra, right? So at that time, the Venerable Subhuti then asked the Buddha, "World Honored One, may I ask you a question again? If sons and daughters of good family want to develop the highest, most fulfilled and awakened mind, if they wish to attain the highest perfect wisdom, What should they do to help quiet their drifting minds and master their thinking? And Buddha says, Buddha replied, Subhuti, a good son or daughter who wants to give rise to the highest, most fulfilled and awakened mind must create this resolved attitude of mind. I must help to lead all beings to the shore of awakening, but after these beings have become liberated, in truth, I know that not even a single being has been liberated. Why is this so? If a disciple cherishes the idea of a self, a person, a living being, or a universal self, then that person is not an authentic disciple. Why? Because in fact there is no independently existing object of mind called the highest, most fulfilled, and awakened mind. So, in Buddhism there's these 4 vows, right? And the first one is, sentient beings are numberless, I vow to liberate them. But the irony is, of course, that they're already liberated. There's no such thing as an unliberated being. Like, it just doesn't even exist, right? And so this vow, I think, ultimately is meant to point us to this reality that, in fact, there's nothing for us to do. There really is nothing to do, nothing to accomplish. It's already fait accompli. It's not like there's any such thing as any separate being anywhere. And indeed, when we start to look at our own separate being and try to find it, like look for ourselves as a separate identity, inside, outside, where is it? I mean, at best, we might see something hanging there in space, but it's a rootless object, right? The only thing that our false self is sustained by is us, investing in it. It doesn't exist at all. It's only in our, imagined thoughts, perhaps, does it exist. Yeah, it's just floating there in empty space. It's not a real thing. The only thing that maybe defines our existence at all is maybe the breath. And so maybe that's why breath is not a bad thing to focus on, because it's actually happening. You can say for sure, you're breathing in, you're breathing out. I think all bets are off about any other content that may arise. Questionable at best, yes? Hanging there in empty space, at best, yes. And to notice that's what our reality is slowly dissolving into emptiness all the time. All the time, yeah. And it all is emptiness already, yeah. And we create these ideas about ourselves, and then that creates a form, and then we cling to it and go, well, this is me, but I gotta tell you, no, it ain't. It just ain't, because everything is empty. Everything. So any ideas we have about ourselves, any ways we have of relating, any tendencies we have in our minds, any thoughts that arise, all of it is just the same. Yeah. So Buddha replies, Subhuti, a good son or daughter who wants to give rise to the highest, most fulfilled, awakened mind, must create this resolved attitude of mind. I must help lead all beings to the shore of awakening. But then again, the reality is, they're already there, right? But that being said, the Buddha himself is telling us that this is how we should spend our time, right? If you're going to spend time here in this fake-a-looey reality, the best thing you can hope to do is to be pretty committed to helping people realize, at least, right, that they are already liberated. Yeah, I would say that's what he's saying there. But in fact, it's all just lies. It's not real. It's just, an expression of emptiness, yeah. So, what do you think, Subhuti? In ancient times, when the Buddha was living with Dipankara Buddha, did he attain anything called the highest, most fulfilled, and awakened mind? And Subhuti says, no, most honored one. According to what I understand from the teachings of the Buddha, there is no attaining of anything called the highest, most fulfilled, and awakened mind, because there's no such thing, right? It just isn't. And even like our concept of emptiness must not be clung to. Anything that we think we understand, like we come to some sort of thing and we go, well, this is it. My body and mind are gone. This is emptiness. I'm done. No, you're not. You can't cling to anything, even your concept of what you think you might understand. You can't. So, yeah. So there's no such thing. Highest, most, no such thing. It's nothing to cling to. So that's what that is. And then Subhuti says, a comparison can be made with the idea of a large human body. What would you understand me to mean if I spoke of a large human body? I would understand that the Lord Buddha was speaking of a large human body, not as an arbitrary conception of its being, but as a series of words only, right? You're describing a concept. I would understand that the words carried merely an imaginary meaning, because it's based on thought. It's a concept, a large human body. When the Buddha speaks of a large human body, he uses the words only as words. right? There's no such thing, is the point there. And Subhuti, it is just the same when a disciple speaks of liberating numberless sentient beings. If they have in mind any arbitrary conception of sentient beings or of definite numbers, then they are unworthy of being called a disciple. Subhuti, my teachings reveal that even such a thing as is called a disciple is non-existent. Furthermore, there's really nothing for a disciple to liberate. So this puts him in this very awkward position of explaining that, yeah, ideally, you have in mind that you're going to liberate all, but really, no, none of that is gonna happen because it isn't. It just isn't so, right? It isn't so. It's emptiness liberating emptiness, which is already liberated. Yeah, that kind of thing. So a true disciple knows that there's no such thing as a self, a person, a living being, or a universal self. A true disciple knows that all things are devoid of selfhood, devoid of any separate individuality. To make this teaching even more emphatic, the Lord Buddha continued, if a disciple were to speak as follows, I have to create a serene and beautiful Buddha field, that person is not yet truly a disciple. Why? What the Buddha calls a serene and beautiful Buddha field is not in fact a serene and beautiful Buddha field, and that is why it is called a serene and beautiful Buddha field. Subhuti, only a disciple who is wholly devoid of any conception of separate selfhood is worthy of being called a disciple. So, yeah. So this idea of creating some other space that could be somehow better, right? Or it just isn't. It's not possible. The Buddha then asked Subhuti, what do you think? Does the Buddha have human eyes? And Subhuti replied, yes, he has human eyes. I mean, sort of. Like, you look at him and he does, yeah. Does he have the eyes of enlightenment? Of course the Buddha has the eyes of enlightenment, otherwise he would not be the Buddha. Well, okay, on some level, right? Those eyes are arising out of emptiness, but they're there, yes, for now. Does the Buddha have the eyes of transcendent intelligence? Yes, the Buddha has the eyes of transcendent intelligence. Does the Buddha have the eyes of spiritual intuition? Yes, Lord, the Buddha has the eyes of spiritual intuition. Does the Buddha have the eyes of love and compassion for all sentient beings? Subhuti agreed and said, Lord, you love all sentient life. What do you think, Subhuti? When I referred to the grains of sand in the river Ganges, did I assert that they were truly grains of sand? No, blessed Lord, you only spoke of them as grains of sand. Subhuti, if there were as many Ganges rivers as there are grains of sand in the river Ganges, and if there were as many Buddha lands as there are grains of sand in all those innumerable rivers, would those Buddha lands be considered numerous? Very numerous indeed, Lord Buddha. Subhuti, I know the mind of every sentient being in all the host of universes, regardless of any modes of thought, conceptions, or tendencies. For all modes, conceptions, and tendencies of thought are not mind, and yet they are called mind. Why? It is impossible to retain a past thought, to seize a future thought, and even to hold on to a present thought. So his point is that all modes of conceptions, tendencies of thought don't exist. They all have this common denominator of emptiness, and that's where they're real. But once they happen, you can't cling to them, there's nothing there. And so that's, I think what he's getting at here is we call it mind. We have a thought and we go, this is my mind, and here, this is me thinking. But in fact, if you follow the thought right down to the ground, no, that's not what's happening. The thought is spontaneously arising out of emptiness, and there is no defined sense of self anywhere to be found. Yeah. So I would say that's what he's getting at. What do you guys think? What do you think? That's a stupid question, right? That's a really bad question. I don't know. What do I think? What do I think? Oh my goodness. It's ungraspable. And you can't talk about it. And yet he's trying, right?
He's trying.
He's trying to put it, to at least help you make that shift, I guess, to seeing the reality behind the reality.
It was an interesting week in time to look at venerating emptiness.
Venerating emptiness, yeah.
And then what happened was emptiness became a thing.
Oh.
And then I had to back right out.
Yeah.
And I had to just stop.
Yeah.
Because what I was focusing on was not into.
Yeah.
I was making it into. I mean, it was a mind
Thing.
thing, like it was just,
It was becoming a concept.
yeah, kind of a concept.
Uh-huh, yeah, that's the thing, right?
So it's really tricky.
It's so tricky. Like, how do you, it's like you can barely look at it and already that's too much.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true, right?
Oh, yeah, no, it was fascinating with that way, just, uh-oh. No, this isn't,
It's too conceptual
yeah, it's too, way.
already.
All right. For me,
Uh-huh.
so.
Yeah, so what are we to do, right?
It is as it is.
It
It was
is what it
interesting
is, yeah.
because the other thing that I was working on was, okay, I want to serve.
Mm-hmm.
And a client says to me, but you already do that. And I said, well, I want to do it better.
Uh-huh.
And then I
Yeah.
had to back out of that. Oh, okay, that's an interesting concept
Uh-huh.
that I'm backing into. And then I just had to come right back down to just sit.
Yeah.
Just,
Practice.
yeah, get out of whatever you're in,
Yeah.
because it's not doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, honestly, what I'm coming down, all I want to do is like practice all the time. I just want to sit all the time, you know, because I think ultimately, yeah, maybe you reach a point where you don't need to sit. You are in it. You're in it and you know and that's it, right?
Yeah.
But for me at this point, I'm like, oh man, I feel like I just want to sit all the time. Yeah.
So yeah, I struggled all week with just being in
It.
being in the moment, just
Tricky.
Just, it is as it is, don't,
Yeah. Because this is it.
yeah.
You can't make it be anything other than what it is. This is it. Yeah, that's right. And then to live from that wisdom all the time and let it guide you look through your life and be what you spring from in every moment, that's a trick and a half, right? That's going to take some practice. Yeah. But, you know, according to Buddha, nothing else worthwhile. Yeah. So, should we do this little chant out and then we can do some meditation, yes? That sound good? So we've got this little chant on the wall. Let's just run this to close it out and then we'll move into a little set, yeah? Okay. So, may the merit of this penetrate into each thing in all places, so that we, with all sentient beings, together realize